gran placer para mí presentar al profesor Halevy para darnos una plática sobre ética en medicina en el campo de la fertilidad. El profesor Halevy fue el director general del hospital Shaare Zedek en Jerusalén por más de 3 décadas, convirtiéndolo en el hospital multidisciplinario más grande de Jerusalén, con más de 1000 camas y una reputación internacional de excelencia en otorgar tratamiento médico compasivo y de vanguardia. Bajo su dirección, el hospital Shaare Zedek estableció varios nuevos departamentos y contribuyó de manera significativa a la investigación médica en varios campos. Además de director general, el profesor Halevy también sirvió como jefe de uno de los departamentos de medicina interna del hospital. En el año 2019, el profesor Halevy fue nombrado presidente del hospital Shaare Zedek. Fue director del Comité Público de Servicios Médicos Nacionales en Israel y también director del Centro de Transplantes de Israel, entre otros. Es profesor en la Escuela de Medicina de Hadassah, afiliada a la Universidad Hebrea de Jerusalén, y autor de más de 100 artículos y 3 libros en su campo. En adición, el profesor Halevy es un amigo cercano de la familia, ortodoxo, miembro de nuestro Bet Knesset en Jerusalén y un Baal Coré de la Torá extraordinario. Profesor Halevy, por favor.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for inviting me. I would like to start by thanking a few people here. I will start with Hatikva and Puah, 2 organizations that give emotional and financial support to patients who suffer from fertility problems. Again, David Center, who is hosting this event today, and my friends in Amigos Shaare Zedek here in Mexico, Yona and Edith, and my friend Akiva, who is here, to thank everybody. I was very impressed with the panel. Goldie, kol hakavod to you. And what I would like to do in the next half hour or so, and there will be some overlap with the topics that you presented, Goldie, is first of all to start by stating 2 main differences between Mexico and Israel as far as it relates to the topic that we are discussing tonight. One, Israel has a national health insurance law by which every citizen is entitled to a very wide basket of services free of charge. And I understand that all fertility treatments here are paid for by the patient or by organizations that support the patient, which means that people of low socioeconomic class, maybe even middle socioeconomic class, cannot afford fertility treatment. Am I right? This does not happen in Israel. And it does not happen in Israel because the ethos of having children is deeply embedded in Israeli culture. First of all, although the government in Israel does not run the country according to a religious law, but according to a secular law, but the first commitment in the Bible of Pu Urvu, of be fruitful and multiply, is part of the Israeli ethos. The other part is that I know that all of you know that Israel was founded on the ashes of the victims of the Shoah, of the Holocaust. And that's why families in Israel would like to have children. And that's why you don't have to pay, and Israel is the only country in the world. There are many countries in the world where there is socialized medicine, national health insurance, like England, like the Scandinavian countries. No country in the world give you 2 children free of charge. I'm not talking about 1 cycle of IVF. I'm talking about 2 children. You are entitled up to the age of 45, free of charge, to have any fertility treatment until you have 2 children. The other difference between Israel and Mexico, and you will see it in my presentation, is that most of the activities that relate to fertility are regulated. there are laws. We have a law in Israel for surrogacy. We have a law in Israel for ovum donation. We have a ruling of the Supreme Court about homosexual couples. I will relate to it, but I was impressed that this topic in Israel, the topic of fertility in Mexico, the topic of fertility, the issue of fertility treatment is not regulated. There is much more freedom to the physician according to his or her personal ethics to make decisions. So really in the next few slides, I would like to relate to social, ethical, and Jewish law dilemmas that are brought to our doorstep by ART, by assisted reproductive technology. And I should say that I believe that every society, definitely modern society, when they have to cope with innovations in science, they should make decisions that will be socially acceptable, in a socially acceptable manner. We have these days an example from a completely different area that has nothing to do with fertility, AI. The ChatGPT that appeared in our life in November of last year, only 6 years ago, or the general term of large languages models, LLM, calls for ethical dilemmas of the highest order. And governments will have to decide how to regulate it in order to benefit from AI, including in medicine and in many other fields, the many benefits that we can derive from it, but do not let the risks dominate our lives. So the same thing with the social, ethical, and Jewish dilemmas that relate to fertility. And it's not working. So maybe someone there? Okay. So if we are doing, I will relate to IVF and to PGD separately. If we relate to IVF, I can see main 5 ethical dilemmas. The first one is embryo, and I will relate to each one of them. The first one is embryo dilution. The second one is limitation on mother's age. The third one are ethical and social dilemmas that relate to surrogacy, then ovum donation, and ART for homosexual couples. I have to say that all these procedures are very expensive, and one of the reasoning, one of the issues that have to bother us is the financial burden on the public. But as I say, Israel is really unique in the importance of be fruitful and multiply. Most people, you know, an average family in Israel has 3.6 children, which is really a high number. The ultra-Orthodox community have many more than 3.6 children. I come from a hospital that delivers 22,000 babies a year. I heard this morning that in ABC they deliver 2,000 a year. We deliver 22,000, so it's almost 2,000 a month. And it has to do with the large families in Israel. So let's start with embryo dilution. I'll try again. So I need help. Okay, so embryo dilution. When do we need to do embryo dilution? So when IVF started, and I'm not an expert on IVF, and the 2 specialists that sit here are invited to correct me. Today, we do not put back in the womb more than 1, in Israel at least. I don't know if here you put 2, but at the beginning of IVF, the case of triplets and even quadruplets was not so unusual. And even today, although it is very rare, spontaneous pregnancy could happen with quadruplets. Definitely when the patient gets clomiphene, fertility treatment, hormonal treatment, before IVF, without IVF. So I think even if it's a little bit theoretical, one should deal with it. Are we allowed to do embryo dilution? So if you talk to Christianity and to Catholicism, and I will relate to it again in the issue that you discussed at the end of the panel about what to do with the frozen embryos, the millions of frozen embryos around the world. So according to Catholicism, life starts when the sperm meets the egg. So definitely you are not allowed to dilute in the womb, to dilute anyone. It's really a sin according to Catholicism. According to Judaism, elimination of an embryo before the 24th week of gestation is allowed in the case of quadruplets. Why? Because there is evidence in the literature that the risk to the mother and to the embryo, I hope the gynecologist will approve, if not you are invited to comment, when you go down from 4 to 3, the risk goes down to mother and to the embryos significantly. And because sanctity of life is the basic rule in Judaism, you are allowed before 24 weeks of gestation, which is gvul hachayut, the border of viability, you are allowed to dilute the 4th embryo. Which of the 4 will you dilute? If they all look good and look the same, it will be a random selection to dilute one of them. If one of them is morphologically or ultrasonographically looks worse than the others, so the weakest one will be diluted. So this is as far as this issue. Again, I'm trying to, okay. No. It does work. Can you help me there?
Yes.
Because limitation of mother age. So the risk of overstimulation increases with age. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, overstimulation today is much more rare than in the beginning of IVF. We can do it meticulously, but it still poses a certain risk to the mother. So there is a risk of overstimulation, and if we are talking about a 45-year-old patient, the risk is even higher. And the chance of successful pregnancy decreases with age. One should also consider the interest of the child born to a relatively elderly couple, and we have to think about the good of the child. So all these may call for limitations of mother's age. On the other hand, the right to reproduce, the right to parenthood, is a very basic right in modern human Western culture. So are we allowed to limit the age? What happens in Israel? So in Israel, they finance IVF up to 2 children, up to the age of 45. I think that after 45, the chance of successful IVF goes down steeply. So if someone wants to try and will find a fertility expert that will cooperate, and she could find, she will have to pay for it. By the way, a mother's age up to 52, she can get ovum donation and she can get pregnant, but again, it will not be financed by the state after age 45. Again, I believe, I don't know what's the situation, I don't know what you two do when a 52 or a 51-year-old patient comes to you. She got married only recently and she wants to have an IVF. Will you do it to her or not? But in Israel, it was changed recently from 52 to 54, but that's the upper limitations of mother age. According to Jewish law, there is no limit at all. Those of you who know the Torah know that Sarah, our foremother, gave birth at age 90, but I'm not sure, according to various researchers, if the biblical year is identical to the modern year that we count today. So you cannot tell if it was really 90. But no halachic ruler gives any limit to mother's age to become pregnant, so there is no limit according to Jewish law. Surrogacy. The question is asked, is payment to the surrogate mother ethical? There is always a danger of exploitation. I started this lecture by saying that the difference between here in Israel is that here there is overt, again, correct me if I'm wrong, I dare actually to accuse the Mexican society for the overt inequality. The rich can afford fertility treatment, assisted reproductive technique, the poor cannot. In Israel, when we discuss this payment to the surrogate mother ethical, we are afraid from exploitation. We are afraid that only poor mothers will decide to carry babies for infertile couple and to become surrogate mother. There is also the emotional aspect of handing over the newborn. And when the surrogate mother needs also ovum donation or artificial insemination, the situation becomes more complicated. So Israel came out with a law of surrogacy. And according to this law of surrogacy, back in 1996, almost 3 decades ago, a law was enacted that they call a contract for carrying embryos. And it started only with heterosexual couples, married couples that are allowed to sign a contract. The contents of which is dictated by the Ministry of Health for another woman to carry their baby and to be a surrogate mother. As to the compensation, the monetary compensation, it is dictated by law that the monetary compensation will reflect the loss of income that the surrogate mother suffered, expenses that she had, but it will not turn her from someone who cannot buy an apartment to someone who can buy an apartment. It will not turn her from poor to rich, and this is our barrier or our measure against exploitation. So that's the Israeli law of surrogacy. And by the way, research done in Israel shows that altruism is the dominant motive of the surrogate mother. And surrogacy in Israel is quite common. The Jewish law regarding surrogacy is most halachic rulers, the rabbi should correct me if I'm wrong, most halachic rulers would allow it. Because again, when do we need surrogacy? We need surrogacy in the rare occasion, rare and more common, in the rare occasion of 1 to 1 million that a woman is born without a womb. It's called the Mayer-Rokitansky syndrome. And just to show you how some people do not get the fame that they deserve, the full name of this syndrome is Mayer-Rokitansky-Kuster-Hauser. And Kuster-Hauser usually are eliminated. Everybody knows the name Rokitansky. So this is a little bit injustice that I'm trying to correct this evening. But this is a very rare syndrome. But a woman can be born with severe malformation of the uterus, and the uterus cannot carry pregnancy. And also there are many cases of women who underwent hysterectomy, either before they got married or after they had one marriage. They remarried and would like to have children with their new spouse. And in these cases, they will use surrogacy, which is quite common in Israel. But this research that shows that altruism is the dominant motive of the surrogate mother gives us some peace of mind as to exploitation, as to the need to give monetary compensation, and makes it look much more moral and much more ethical. Now, another question regarding surrogacy is who is the mother? Is it the biological mother in case of a couple who have sperm and have ovum, but the woman does not have womb, she needs a womb of another woman? Is she the mother, the genetic biological mother, or is the mother that carried the baby in her womb for 9 months with the evident bonding that is created with the emotional aspect? Maybe she should be the legal mother. So again, according to Jewish law, most of the halachic rulers vote for the genetic mother, for the biological mother. There is a minority of halachic rulers who will give the motherhood to the one who carried the baby, to the surrogate mother. and there is a small minority who will say that this baby will have two mothers. It has legal implications. The Supreme Court in Israel discussed it for certain couples that it came before him, but I think the general consensus is that the mother, it is considered the mother, is the biological mother of the child. The next issue is ovum donation and surrogacy by homosexual couples. So the approach to marriage between homosexual couples is really depends on societal view on homosexual marriage and its legal standing. The government of Israel so far does not recognize marriage between the Israeli law between homosexual couples, but it does recognize their rights as a common law couple, as a common law spouse, each one of them, which gives them national insurance, which gives them support, and even more than that. Less than a year ago, the Israeli Supreme Court, when a homosexual couple appealed to the court, why do they have to spend $150,000 in order to go to the United States, where certain states, Idaho is maybe one of the leading ones, will enable them to get an ovum donation. Don't forget that homosexual couple, the surrogate mother is not enough. If it's a male gay couple, they have the sperm, but they don't have the ovum. So they need an ovum donation as well. The total cost for this is $150,000. And again, in the name of equality in Israel, and there was a minister in Israel who is homosexual, and he spent for 2 children more than $150,000. Of course, it's not double because they use the same frozen embryos from the first pregnancy, but over $150,000. And the Supreme Court in Israel ruled last year that homosexual couples, even if their marriage is not legally recognized, are entitled to full compensation like an heterosexual couple. Full compensation, they are allowed to 2 children with ovum donation, IVF, surrogacy, funded by public funding. I think this is a very advanced view, and of course, when we go to the rabbis who sit here a little bit embarrassed, and I apologize to you, because Jewish law explicitly ban any homosexualism. It's really some of the things that should not be done according to Jewish law. I don't think there is chance that even very advanced rabbi will change it with the change in societal view in the Western world on homosexuality. So you see here the contradiction between the civil law in Israel as dictated by the Supreme Court and the Jewish law dictated by Halacha. And I just give you the situation without reflecting my view. I will hint that I believe that the rabbis would not like my personal view. Goes both ways. So what will we do? No one there can help me? There is a technical man there?
Yes, here is.
So if you can go back to where we stood. Huh?
Yes. There? One more.
Please. The next one.
La siguiente. That one?
Okay, PGD. So PGD was discussed in the panel. It's getting late. I'll try to finish by around 10 o'clock in 10 minutes or maximum 15 minutes. If you will have patience for questions, I'll gladly take questions. So PGD, pre-implantation genetic diagnosis or pre-implantation genetic testing, is a procedure that really ignites the imagination. It's with us already 20 years. Shaare Zedek was one of the first institutions in Israel to start a PGD laboratory. It calls for cooperation between the fertility department, the IVF program of the hospital, and the genetic department of the hospital. And it started, I think, relatively early in Israel in general and in Shaare Zedek in particular because of the Jewish Ashkenazi genes that does not have direct bearing on PGD. I will relate to it in a minute. but because of the over 300 congenital monogenic diseases that are, some of them are prevalent in certain segments of the Israeli population, whether the Jewish Ashkenazi or Jewish Sephardic that come from various places. Israel was one of the first really to enact modern PGD in order to enable couples who are known to carry this mutation, or even worse, couples who already have an affected child at home, with Tay-Sachs, with cystic fibrosis, with familial dysautonomia, with achondroplasia being dwarfs and dwarfism, and many, many other monogenic diseases, in order to help this couple to produce a healthy child, that at least the siblings of the sick kid will be healthy children. We offer them PGD, which means that despite the fact that they do not have any fertility problems, we tell them don't get pregnant the natural way, do it through IVF. In IVF, we stimulate the ovary, we get between 5, 10, 20 fertilized embryos, we subject them to overnight DNA testing. In a dominant disease, statistically, 50% will be affected. In a recessive disease, statistically, I mean 10 to 20 is not a large cohort, but statistically only 25 will be affected. We have very good chance, if we have before us 10 to 20 fertilized embryos, fertilized ova, we have a very good chance to select a healthy baby. We started our program in 2004, and there are 6,000 healthy babies born in Shaare Zedek to couples who are carriers of bad monogenic mutations or who have affected their children at home. What are the ethical dilemmas here? So, first of all, to do IVF to someone who has no fertility problem. But in order to prevent the ogmat nefesh, the stress of the parents, and the suffering of the embryos, the remote chance of hyperstimulation of the ovary is really cancelled and totally ignored. So it's definitely ethically permissible, but we have other ethical dilemmas. So monogenic diseases that are very severe diseases, to prevent the amniocentesis, the placental biopsy, to do it before the embryos in the womb, absolutely allowed. But what about BRCA? BRCA does not have full penetrance. Not everybody will be sick. Roughly speaking, we would say that the carrier of BRCA has a 40% chance to develop breast cancer until the age of 40, 60% chance until the age of 60. And there are preventative measures. They are not very efficient. More frequent mammographies from early age, more frequent breast ultrasound and breast MRIs. So we have not full penetrance. It is not manifested immediately after birth, only at the age of 20%, 40%, and we have preventative measures. Are we allowed ethically to do PGD in order to prevent the birth of a BRCA carrier? You do it here? No, you don't do it. We also don't do it in Shaare Zedek. Now, what about Huntington? Huntington is a congenital disease with full penetrance. Full penetrance means 100% of the carrier of the bad genes of Huntington will be affected, but they will fall sick on the average at age 30. Are we allowed to prevent it? What will happen if we will find in the future that Alzheimer's is a genetic disease? We don't think so now. And if it is genetic, it's probably polygenic. But let's assume that Alzheimer's, that has high prevalence at very high age, will be found, will discover all the genes. Are we allowed, or is it logical to do PGD to a mother in order, to a couple, in order to prevent the birth of a baby who will develop at age 80, 50% chance to develop Alzheimer's? I'm not sure. So I think there is no consent at this time about the significance of age of onset, severity of the disease, and efficacy of preventative and therapeutic measures as far as PGD should be performed. The Israeli Basket of Services gives free of charge PGD to every carrier of this one of the monogenic congenital disease, or to every couple who has an affected child at home, and again it's free of blood, and the Jewish law permits PGD. Okay, gender selection through PGT. I think you discussed it, and I'm not sure that my personal view or the Israeli view is the same view that was expressed by you, because we look at gender selection at the top of the slippery slope. What do I mean by slippery slope? What does a couple want? Every couple, including the couples or the members, the people who sit in this audience. We want a perfect baby. A perfect baby in terms of his looks or her looks, in terms of his IQ, in terms of his talents. We want a perfect baby. And maybe PGD will enable us in the future to affect the color of the hair, to affect, it enables even today, to affect the color of the eyes, and maybe even the IQ. Isn't that gender selection the top of the slippery slope that will really lead us to go down through the slippery slope? So, what is the Israeli regulation? When we talked about sex-linked disease, like hemophilia, it's for sure. There is no moral or ethical hesitance at all. It's permissible, it's financed by the state in Israel, and we do selection, and that's it. But Israel has a very interesting law, enacted by a special committee that was appointed by the Ministry of Health, because certain cultural groups in Israel, I think the Yemenites are leading, when they have 3, 4, 5 girls, for instance, the stress of the parents is enormous, sometimes leads to divorce. To do gender selection through PGT or PGD is not a major problem today. We said the stimulation of the ovary to a couple who doesn't suffer from fertility is not a big deal. So under certain circumstances in Israel, very rare circumstances, and I'll give you the statistic, if a couple has 4 children of the same gender, and the psychologist assess that the stress on the couple and the quality of their partnership is severely affected by the fact that they have 4 from the same gender, a special committee that has to assess them psychologically and to give permission can allow gender selection through PGD. So this was started in 2012. We are 10 or 11 years later. There are 60 requests a year on the average for this committee. 20% are sex-linked, so there is no need in committee. This is done. From the other 80%, 87% are rejected. So the couple was not found in such a situation that we should allow it morally and endanger going down the slippery slope. But another interesting is that 13% that are accepted, 2/3 to 3/4 of the couples would like to do a gender selection to have a boy.